So we could talk tonight about trust. The title is Who You Gonna Trust? Right? Reminiscent of Ghostbusters, perhaps. Nisargadatta had a very brief saying that he used more than once, and the saying was trust, test, taste, right? Three-step process. Trust, test, taste. So the purpose of the trust in whatever he was telling people, he would suggest just trust what he's saying enough to become motivated enough, curious enough to test it out for yourself, right? It's certainly not something that he was trying to convince people of to believe as a belief and take away with them. What he was trying to do is instill enough of a degree of trust in what he was saying that people would test it out for themselves, right? When we test it out for ourselves, maybe it's true, maybe it's not. We don't actually know. Maybe, all this talk about enlightenment, maybe it's true, maybe it's not. But what we can do is to test it out and see if it is true. And then if we do that diligently and over, some sustained period of time, then it's very possible that we have the actual taste of it. Once we do, there's not a question of trusting, and there's not a question of testing, really. It's what's left is the taste of it. It doesn't require, continued belief in whatever the teacher is saying, because you know for yourself. That's the whole value of it. And the point of trusting is just enough to instill a sense of curiosity and possibility, to invest some period of time and energy in one's life to find out what we truly are, right? I mean, I remember, after having been in spirituality for, some time, maybe 10 years, admitting to myself that I didn't actually know whether enlightenment existed or not. But the benefit of acknowledging that is that we become more open to the possibility. If we believe something, then we sort of close ourselves to how that can really be investigated or questioned, or we limit our inquiry. If we believe that it's true, we're looking at it from that perspective. If we believe it's true, we have an idea of what it is. So again, we're looking from a smaller and smaller perspective for what we think it is. It's actually much more fruitful to acknowledge that we don't know if we don't. From that perspective, we've got a clean slate. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. But perhaps if someone says that, yes, it's possible in this lifetime, it's not only for a certain few, it's actually our destiny. And many sages have said that. So we could take some degree of trust from that. Perhaps not as a belief, right? But just some degree of trust to say, okay, maybe it's worth my while to find out if that's really true or not. You know, it's up to us. We all get a choice. But the important thing is to take it as a possibility rather than a belief. You know, the possibility is yes, but I'm still going to find out for myself. It's the only thing that actually counts. If I have examined it to my, you know, the limits of my energy and discernment, and I find that it's not there, well, that's what I found, but at least I've investigated it. There's that knowingness to it. But, you know, maybe it is there, right? Maybe it is a possibility in this lifetime to find out what we truly are, what is actually living this life. That's what we talk about, right? That it is possible, and there are, you know, there's no playbook out there. There's no one playbook. Is this how you do it? Everyone's path is different, but there are some paths that are a lot more direct than other paths. You know, everything in one sense is a path, because even if we, you know, get totally, you know, so-called astray, you know, there's still something to be learned there, right? Even if we find ourselves, perhaps after years or even decades, with a teacher that is, let's say, limited, if not outright false, maybe we learned something from that too. Why was it that we submitted ourselves to that? How did I, you know, what belief did I hold about myself or the other person that caused me to be, you know, pulled in that direction, that caused me to acquiesce to things that I really questioned. Okay, so whatever one's path is, there's always things to be learned. But this movement that Nisargadatta suggests is to trust, to test, and to taste. So the first step is to trust. Well, I mean, I've met people saying, "Well, I don't trust. I can't trust." But all of us trust some things, right? You know, we breathe out, and we trust that the next breath would be there. If we didn't, we'd be holding our breath for as long as we could. You know, we trust that when we go to sleep at night, that we'll wake up in the morning. We trust that the sun will be there again tomorrow. We also trust what our mind tells us. Right? So all these other ways that we trust aren't problematic, but trusting everything that the mind tells us, well, that can be problematic, because you know, we believe things about ourselves that are not really true. They might be, you know, relatively true. We believe things about other people that we find out aren't true at all later on. You know, we believe things about the world and about the divine that aren't ever true, actually. You know, so the mind has this tendency to distort what we see based on our past conditioning and patterning. That it's almost like a veil or a filter that we see life through, and life looks like that, which reinforces our conditioning and our veil, and so we tend to become more maybe rigid for most of us over time, you know, thinking that we really have it down and understand, you know, who I am and how everything works and how everything should be. But when we really look at the many times that we've gotten things wrong, or we've looked at things from a limited perspective, you know, you could almost say some things are true at this level, but no longer true at maybe a more elevated level, a broader perspective, where it's not just me as an individual looking at the situation from my own, out of my own interest, self-interest, but it's really looking at the situation as a whole, sort of as a, from someone up in the grandstand looking on rather than a participant. So it's something might be true at one level and not at all true at a higher or deeper level. But despite the shortcomings of the mind, this, the sort of limitation of seeing the world through this filter, through this veil, it's still the best instrument that we've got, at least initially, right? So that's what we have to use. It is useful to see its limitations. Just if we see its limitations, we sort of dial down our certainty in what it's telling us, and we're more willing to question what thoughts it pronounces with great certainty. And that questioning is really using the mind to question the mind. It's Ramana used the example of using one thorn to pry out another thorn that had gotten embedded in your foot, right? So it's still a thorn, it's still a thought, but we're using one thought to undermine or dislodge our certainty in another thought. So it can be useful to question, things that we pronounce with great certainty, or, are quite sure of our position and who's right and who's wrong and who should do what and how the world should be and who I am, when I look at myself, etc. So those questions, we often do that. We often question ourselves, but I'd suggest that we do it from a position of sort of self-judgment, or, figuring out who's really to blame, or, using it to berate ourselves or congratulate ourselves, or that kind of self-reflection. But you can't be both objective and judgmental at the same time. Trying to be as objective as we can when we're looking at the sort of the mechanism of the mind is what is useful about it, is just to see it. So seeing it not from the perspective of how can I make it better, right? How can I fix my thoughts? If we're doing that, then we're no longer objective. We're a manipulator. We're trying to change something. So we're not interested, as far as what we're talking about here, to try to improve our thoughts or to even stop our thoughts. It's to really see how that whole thought process works. What particular thoughts hook us, what particular thoughts take us for a ride, what thoughts make us suffer. Where do those arise from? What am I believing that causes me to suffer? What story am I telling myself? Really looking at thoughts from that perspective. So that's what we have to work with initially, our thinking mind. So we can do some initial work even from that level of really questioning the mind. Not as a self-improvement project. This is really just to really understand the mechanism, right? So, one could make the argument easily that, when we're talking about trust, hey, if I can't trust myself, who can I trust, right? Which is true to some degree. I mean, there needs to be some willingness to look on one's own authority, not to, what's the word when you send it off to another country to make things for you? Not export, but anyway, it's not to assign that to someone else to do the hard looking for you. It's something that we have to do for ourselves, to really delve into it for ourselves. And that's actually one of the benefits of meditation. I know meditation is often presented as a way to, get more peaceful. It's good for the body. That's all true, but as far as I'm concerned, one of the real values is that it gets us to spend some quiet, up close and personal time with our mind. Mind may not be quiet, but we have the opportunity to observe it from a place of quiet, no matter how noisy it may be. So Buddha's dying words were reportedly, we don't know, he wasn't on Zoom at the time, but his dying words reportedly were, be a light unto yourself, right? So this seems to support the idea of, this personal authority. But, the word be light unto yourself, the word yourself sort of opens up the possibility of what was he actually referring to there. So initially it might be, my own discernment, my own mental capacity is, flawed and distorted as that may be often. It's the best tool I got, so I'm going to go with that. But the promise there is that there's something within there that is, let's say, the light of possibility. Okay. But if we take, this thinking mind to be the final decider, the final judge and jury, then, and we know, hopefully we all know that our, thoughts and attitudes and opinions and everything are very, if not thoroughly, conditioned by everything that's gone before. So if we have complete trust in the truth of whatever we think and our thoughts are all conditioned, then we have a closed loop system. We think it, therefore it's true, and that reinforces our thinking. And we can look around and we see many people living their life in that closed loop system. But there is a possibility if that sort of imprisoning perspective is cracked open somehow through life, let's say, or maybe just through our own innate curiosity. But perhaps, at some point we stumble upon, a teacher that talks about the possibility of enlightenment. And this is, what happened with Nisargadatta. He had a teacher for a very brief period of time. The teacher told him, "You are the supreme reality," and shortly after that, the teacher died. And so Nisargadatta was on his own. He just trusted the teacher enough to really examine whether that's true or not. Didn't take it as a belief, didn't adopt it as a belief, but really inquired. If you've seen Nisargadatta, any kind of videos of him, you know he's an intense personality, right? So you can imagine this next 3 years of search for him, where he describes as basically every spare moment. I mean, he was still working, he was married, he had kids, he had a shop, and yet every spare moment he devoted to this inquiry. I wonder if this teacher is right. I'm going to look for myself. I'm going to test out what he told me and see if it's actually true. And with some justifiable pride, he says, and yes, it only took me 3 years. So, but for me, the beauty of that story is this is one statement by a teacher, that, fell on receptive ears. And that was sufficient in that case to propel Nisargadatta on this intensive journey that resulted in, one of the most profound sages of the last century. So this supreme reality, I know it can sound quite grandiose, but there is only one reality. So, we could call it supreme, or we could call it, the one whatever. But if it's the one reality, it is also what you are, right? It's all one. That was the promise, that was the offering that his guru offered him, that possibility, and he took that as sufficient trust in however that was presented to him to devote actually the rest of his life, but 3 years of intensive inquiry before he himself tasted the reality of that. Okay. So his famous book is I Am That, which can sound to Western ears quite grandiose. In Sanskrit, I believe the term is Tattvam Asi, which is that thou art. So that's actually a better way of saying it, and it's not quite so much in your face. But the meaning is essentially the same, that the discovery of what we truly are is that underlying reality. It's not like we are separate from that in any way, much more like that we are an expression of that. So the purpose of a teacher then is really to instill or suggest an avenue of inquiry, but we still have to walk down that path ourselves. The greatest avatar in the world can't do it for us. They can suggest a path. That can save an enormous amount of time if it's, one of the more direct paths, you could say. They're all paths, but some are shorter than others. So, from our perspective, that's sort of the key, whether that engenders enough trust and curiosity and you could even say longing for something that resonates in us enough to devote time and energy in that inquiry, right? But we still have to test it for ourselves. That's the key, rather than take anybody's word for it. And then if we pursue that diligently enough and find out, yes, that's actually true in my own direct experience, I no longer have to take anyone else's word for it. I know it for myself. I've tasted it. I know the nectar. I don't need to depend on anybody else's word for it. So this isn't a lifelong matter of trusting somebody else with your time and energy. This is to cure a specific issue, right? To dislodge much like an embedded thorn, dislodge a misperception. That's what it's about. And dislodge the misperception of being a separate individual person. That's the fundamental misperception. So if there's some teacher that points the way, that you trusted enough and to test it out for yourself, and found that path to be fruitful, there's of course a sense of gratitude that of course would last a lifetime. I feel that sense of gratitude towards my teacher, Adyashanti. But it doesn't mean that you're indentured for life, right? It's not that that you've you're dependent on the other person. The other person may still have some, clarifying points even after awakening. That's as it should be. But the object of this spiritual search is really to cure the disease. And the disease is the misperception of who we fundamentally are. It's sort of like, if you have an infection, you take penicillin or some antibiotic, and when the infection goes away, you don't take the antibiotic for the rest of your life, right? So this isn't about, putting oneself in a subjugated position, relative to some other person forever. And it's only for a specific issue, You're not asking or hopefully expecting your teacher to be your banker or your lover or your surgeon or your plumber or whatever, right? It's for a specific purpose. And to believe otherwise have gotten seekers and teachers in trouble, right? To believe that it's a forever kind of thing, right? That dependent relationship. So it's subject to abuse, but when we realize that it's done as a suggestion for an avenue to look for, whatever time it takes us to look, then if it's helpful, wonderful, we can be grateful. And if we find it not helpful, then we can be on our way. There's no issue here. Okay, before we move on, I wanted to mention one other thing, because a lot of people, when they talk about trust, they talk about, well, I trusted this other person and they disappointed me, they betrayed me, and now I can't trust anymore. But what that really is talking about expectations. It's not really trust. It's about, what expectations we have about how the other person will behave, towards who? Well, towards me, of course, right? And so it's always in relationship to, our own expectations. And suddenly this person does something unexpected, or something that perhaps they even said they wouldn't do, or, there's some written or unwritten or even unspoken agreement that, here's the scope of the behavior that, that we're going to operate within, and this person does something else. Okay, so we can conclude we were betrayed. Well, not really. I mean, we had certain expectations, and those ultimately were dashed. That's what actually happened. What we tell ourselves about it was, they betrayed me. But I'd suggest that whatever happened, the other person was acting totally in character. We may not have known what that character was, but however they acted was how they acted. And, we can wish it were otherwise, but the finest actor in the entire movie industry history couldn't play that part of the other person more perfectly. Whatever the other person did it totally within character. It may not have been what we expected. It may have been hurtful. It may have been all of those things. But the person is and does what they do. We may not like it. We may be hurt by it. But fundamentally, what gets hurt is our expectations. So often this question of trust and what we expect from other people are equated, and they're quite different. In this case, we can trust the other person to be exactly as they are. That's what we can do. Okay, so let's move on here. So we've been talking so far about, trusting this movement enough to look for ourselves, inquiring within, questioning our thoughts, seeing what's really that light is that the Buddha referred to. But there is a much deeper form of trust, and that is trust in life as a whole. And this, to trust in life as a whole, this is, to do that, we have to relinquish our tendency to categorize things as right or wrong, good or bad. This should happen, that shouldn't happen. All we can say with certainty is that what happens, happens. That's what we can say. How do we know it should happen? Because it did happen. But there's things obviously that we can't condone, right? We can't, it goes against our nature to, think, well, that's okay. We're not saying that it's okay. We're saying that it is. There's a big difference there. And what is the entirety of it. We're talking about the wholeness of life. The wholeness of life is infinite, which means everything, right? We can't compartmentalize the good things over here, attribute those to a God, and then those things over there that we don't like, we'll attribute that to some other entity, some other, universe, I guess. But what we actually experience is the entirety of it. And coming into acceptance of that doesn't mean that we, as humans, have to like or agree or condone everything that we see, right? It means that we've acknowledged that that is what's happening, that is the entirety of it. And I would suggest that as it is, as the world is a perfect setup for waking up. If everything was just nice and easy and always worked out and nobody ever got hurt and nothing terrible ever happened, there'd be no inclination to do this on Tuesday evenings, right? We just, go on living our life and being okay with that. So, when we really sense into life as it's occurring, we can notice that whatever it is that's occurring happens, as we pointed out in the beginning, within this field of awareness, where when we understand that this awareness is beyond harm, we understand that it is not our personal awareness, but it is actually the one awareness functioning through all of us. When we really understand that and see that deeply, we can see how it's colored, how it's filtered through different people's conditioning. So the behavior looks different, but the fundamental beingness, the essence of all of us is that one awareness. I mean, that's where, that's the only place actually where we are truly equal. It's not even equal because there's no differentiation, right? It's just where everything is one. And so when we are seeing things from that and seeing behavior as a result of conditioning, we can see how that arises. We can see the degree of pain that it causes, and we can see that it is pain that we inflict on ourselves and other people unnecessarily. And then there's some pain and suffering that is inherent in this world, sickness and old age and death, not easy, right? But we can also walk down that path much more easily when we recognize that our deepest nature is beyond all of that. So, and that awareness doesn't have anything to defend, doesn't have anything to attain. It is what it is. It is, as difficult as it is to grasp it or get a good look at it, it is the most solid, reliable essence of our life, right? Always present, always present, always that within which everything happens. So it is, ultimately reliable, right? So sure, there's some things that are, are more pleasant, some things that are less pleasant, that will continue. But, we recognize that it's still all as it is, right? So, we're no longer trying to manipulate it, always trying to want it to work out in our best interests. That sense of energetically trying to manipulate circumstances to our own benefit, that drops away. That sort of arrogance drops away. And what's left in its place is just life as it's showing up in every moment. And there's a feeling of completeness about it, like it's not showing up in order for something else to happen in the future. It's just as it is. It is there's a sense of just completeness that it's couldn't be otherwise. And so at that point, where does trust come in, right? If it's the only thing that's happening, if it's all one reality, as Nisargadatta talks about it, the supreme reality, the one reality that is astonishing that it's happening at all. Are we, where are we in relation to that? Are we in alignment with it? Are we allowing it to be without our judgmentalism coming into, insisting, well, this life thing is pretty good, I got to admit, but it could be better, and I know how it could be better. When we just step out of that judgmental position and recognize the amazing, magnificent unfolding of life in every moment. We bring to life more sense of awe and appreciation and gratitude, and less of the, well, I know how to fix it, I know how to make it better, I know, what I want, this would work out better for me. If we just let all that alone for a while. Not to gain anything from doing so, but just to recognize it's just not in alignment with life, and we have the choice to really allow ourselves to relinquish our own insistence of what this personal self wants. We can't force that relinquishment, but what we can see is that it's not actually true, and it's not actually as life is. So are we going to trust this our mental capacity of how things are and how things should be, or ultimately are we going to trust life as a whole? But when we really settle into allowing life to be lived through us, then actually the whole concept of trust drops away. If there's only one thing happening and we are allowing that to be, where does trust come in, right? But it tends to work that the more we trust life to unfold in a sort of beneficent way, not just for our own self-aggrandizement, but just for life unfolding, then the more it seems to flow in our own experience, and then we have that, and then we sort of trust that more and become more transparent to that movement. And then we can sense into that subtle energy flow and, just the little nuances of how life is showing up. And we become more in alignment with that. And we see how that feels, and then we trust more. And so it's sort of similar in some ways to the conditioning that we did at a younger age in terms of our mental conditioning. This time it's sort of reconditioning to become more and more transparent to this flow of life. So in the end, it's not really about trust anymore. We feel like it's just this movement, and we're no longer sitting back and saying, well, I don't know, should I trust life or that not? Or should I trust it in this circumstance but not in that? That whole sitting in judgment role that many of us are very familiar with, just drops away. We see it's just not relevant, not actually true. And life begins to move, has an ease to it. It has a flow to it. Doesn't mean that difficult things don't happen, but our perspective about them when they happen has changed.